And then, of course, there's the teacher's books or the resources for teachers, which is when the teacher is working with material and the learners aren't involved. And the fourth thing I have to consider, and this is perhaps strange, is that there's when the teacher and the learners work together and there's no material involved. Even as a writer, I need to be aware of when the books are closed, when the material is not being used and the teacher and the learner are interacting without material, because that affects how I design the material that I'm using. You'll see this in action in a minute in this session. Now, course books and materials are kind of interesting for me because when I was 10 years old, I had to learn Latin. Anybody learn Latin? Yes. Yeah? Oh, excellent. Good. What was interesting about my Latin class was that I never actually learnt to speak Latin. I learnt a lot of tables and a lot of endings. And I was 10 years old and I got slightly frustrated because I thought, why am I learning a language if everybody is dead who speaks it? In retrospect, looking back at it, it was particularly useful because it helped me with lots of other languages later on. But I remember that the course book was very powerful in the classroom, in the Latin classroom. My teacher used the course book with all the rules, and I often used to see the teacher a little like this. If we made a mistake or we did something wrong, he used the course book and said, look what's in the course book. And I even remember when I was supposed to, for homework, learn my Latin tables, he would bash me on the head with the course book for not having memorized all of those tables. In this situation, the course book, the role of the course book is like a dictator. It controls the whole lesson, and it shouldn't be like that. So I want to explore in this session, first of all, what is the role of the course book in the classroom? What role does it serve? I want us to consider how much do course books keep students' heads down? We spend a lot of time in modern methodology talking about keeping students' heads up, keeping them communicating, keeping them talking and practicing and working together in pairs and groups. But there's a danger with a course book that the heads go down and we lose that interaction. So I just want to look at how that relates to the course book. And the other thing I've observed with teachers a lot is that lots of teachers like to change the course book and do different things with it. Cut it up, photocopy it, change it, totally rewrite it for the purposes of the students. And I want us to look at that as well. So let's start with the role. Go back to our diagram. The role of these three things in the classroom. Often we talk about the teacher as the facilitator, the person who helps us and guides us, okay? Not a dictator, but somebody who actually wants us to become better with the language. The teacher's an expert that we can draw information on, and sometimes they play that role. They're also a resource. So if we need information, we can say to the teacher, can you help us? Can you find out some more information? And also sometimes they're a performer. So on Monday at 9 o'clock in the morning when all the students are walking into the classroom and they think, I'm not really interested in learning English this morning, your teacher has to motivate and sometimes needs to perform a little bit. What's the role of the learner? Learners can be co-workers. They can work together in pairs and groups and help each other. They can be explorers. People in search of something, trying to find out information. They can be receivers. They can be getting information from the teacher or from the course book or from different sources, from the computer, from the internet. And they also need to be, and this is very important for the students, they need to be risk takers. They need to make mistakes in order to learn out the correct things, and they need to take risks sometimes. When I was a 10-year-old learner of Latin, I wasn't allowed to take risks. But nowadays we consider it a good thing for the students to be doing. So lots of us will be familiar with these different roles, but my question was, well, what is the role of the course book? If we apply these different terms to teachers and learners, what's one word that describes the course book or the material that we use in class?
Linking? Support.
Okay, I'm going to give you 1 minute, turn to the person next to you and come up with a word that describes the roll of material that I can put here. Okay, off you go.
Человек написал учебник, значит, так все и надо делать. Он же никогда он зря не скажет. Сос.
Okay, let me stop you there.
Lunch.
I can hear people at the front. Let me have a few words that describe a course of material.
Linking element.
A linking element.
A
yeah.
bridge.
A bridge. Okay, nice. Yeah. Any other words?
Tool.
Tool. Yeah.
Basis.
Mediator.
Basis.
Yeah. The basis of something. Yeah. A guide. Students over there, what words did you come up with?
Information.
Giver of information, a provider. Yeah.
Help.
A helper in some way. Okay.
It should be a motivator in some way.
A motivator is a good one, yeah. Motivator, yeah. What I did was I asked the same question to 3 colleagues who I'd observed teach, and I videoed their responses. So I'm going to just play you their responses and you can compare your idea with what they said.
Backbone was the word that I thought of. I suppose it kind of provides a framework, and I'll take the basic idea of the grammar point that the course book is looking at in that unit, or I'll take the topic that the course book is looking at, and I might use the course book as it stands, or I might adapt it quite a lot, or I might adapt it just a little bit. But it gives me a sort of framework so that I know kind of where I'm going or what I'm looking for. I'm not just picking things out of the air.
The role of the course book is to provide you with the material to teach in the classroom. That's the way I see it. Each activity should carry on to the next.
It's a springboard, definitely a springboard, because it's not something that I use from one page to the next, but it's something I get ideas from. It's something that I use for topics and for grammar as well, for a grammar, the backbone of a grammar course.
Okay, so three things came out of. I chose those teachers because they represent the widespread use of the course books, the way lots of people use them. If we take Nick, first of all, he answered the question quite logically. He just said it provides material, so it's a provider, and each activity should carry on to the next. Now Nick, when I observed him teach, is the teacher that opens the book at exercise 1, works through the exercises, gets to exercise 10 at the end of the lesson, students close their book. Very systematic, very safe, he's a very effective teacher, particularly with perhaps lower levels. Gabriel, I like the word that she uses to describe the role. She used the word backbone, which for me is when I'm writing, I'm thinking, yep, the material is that backbone. She uses the word structure and framework. It's the building blocks for the lesson. Sometimes she'd miss out exercise 1, she'd do something else, she goes with exercise 2 and 3, she jumps across the page to something else, she comes back, but she builds this framework with the material. It's a kind of resource, but she builds the lesson on it. And then you've got Judith, who described it as a springboard. Hello, have a seat. For me, the observing Judith's lessons is particularly interesting, particularly when she was using my material, because I did not recognize my book at some times. She just completely changed it. She used it and she pulled things out of it, she copied bits, she cut up things. She literally almost dived into the pool of the classroom and swam around and picked things out and took ideas, but completely changed it, and it became unrecognizable, and the classes were entirely different. They didn't follow the pattern of the course book, and she used it in different ways. So the interesting thing was, how can you put together material that can be used by this teacher and also by this teacher, because they demand very different things. One thing that all three teachers and most teachers have in common is that they quite often start the lesson without the book in order to have the students looking more like meerkats than ostriches. I'm just going to close the door a second. What do I mean? I don't know what the Russian words are for meerkats and ostriches. But in English, if we refer to students being like meerkats, they're interested, they're alert, they're looking around the classroom, they want to know what's going to happen next. And it's nice to start a lesson with lots of meerkats. At the moment, if I look around the room, I can see about 90% of you being like meerkats, which is a good sign for me. That's because meerkats often have their heads up. If I have students who look like ostriches, I sometimes have to work a little harder just to get their interest, their motivation, and that's where you need the teacher as the performer, because they're spending too much time with their heads down. And yet, of course, writing a course book, it's a book on a desk, and it tends to mean that the students' heads go down. So we have to devise our material and use our material so we get that mixture of heads up meerkats and heads down ostriches. What I want is a mixture. It's a very, I do quite a lot of teacher training, and it's an interesting exercise. If you want to self-analyze your own lesson as a teacher, you can use this kind of tool, which represents the length of a lesson. And above the bar is when the students are predominantly got their heads up, and below is when their heads tend to go down. And you can reflect back on a lesson. So if your lesson is 60 minutes or something, you can kind of draw a trend to represent how much the students have got their heads up, how much are they interacting, and how much have they got their heads down. Now this may be positive. This just means that the students are doing very controlled practice. They're doing a gap-fill exercise, or they're doing something where they have to really think and analyze the language. This particular observation came from a speaking lesson. So the teacher started the class with the students' heads up, then gave them an exercise to do, some study work related to some grammar point, for example, and then got the students talking and communicating in pairs for speaking fluency practice, before they did some error correction work at the end, picking out the kinds of errors they'd had, and then finishing the class with a little activity at the end just to get the heads up again. But it's not a scientific tool, but it's quite a nice representation of how classes kind of go up and down in the pattern, and it's a good sign if there's plenty of fluctuation in terms of heads up and heads down. Typically all teachers start with heads up at the beginning. And one of the problems, of course, with course books is as soon as we open them and the teacher says, "Good morning, class, can you all turn to page 30?" the heads go straight down. So we need those simple devices for keeping everybody's heads up. And when you observe teachers teach, one of the typical ways they do it is to use photographs or pictures. One teacher, I observed a lesson, she was using some material from the book. She wanted to start the class, so she put the photograph up on the board and asked the students, "Where do you think this is? What type of country is it?" Anybody guess which country it is? Russia? There's a swamp.